Hello?
Good evening, madam. I am calling from your bank. But before we continue, I'm afraid I have to ask you a number of security questions in order for you to confirm that
Right.
it is in fact you are speaking with to me. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Good. What is the day?
What's the day?
Yes.
Tuesday, Monday.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to accept your first answer, madam, which was Thursday, which is wrong. I'm afraid I have to terminate this call.
Happy New Year and welcome back. I'm recording this on January the 3rd, 2024. Now that phone call reminds me of what happened to me towards the end of last year when I got locked out of my privacy.com account. I'll talk about that more in a moment. Also in today's show, I'll share how I ended 2023 by catching the flu before escaping to the mountains. I'd like to talk about the CIA Triad, that's confidentiality, integrity, and availability in security, but how this relates to privacy. We'll also be talking about how to track your lost phone, especially if you're using GrapheneOS. We'll discuss biometric authentication versus passcodes and those creepy glasses by Ray-Ban and Meta. I've upgraded my GrapheneOS device to the Pixel 8 Pro, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about backups, in particular backing up photos on GrapheneOS and also iPhone using Nextcloud. Now, Nextcloud's a big topic, so I'll touch on using Strongbox and Keepass DX for synchronizing the Keepass database, and then also taking notes using Markdown and the Obsidian app. And then to end the show, I'll touch on my home lab setup and then how we do backups with privacy in mind. Last year, I was locked out of my privacy.com account. Now, bear in mind, privacy.com is not a bank account. They are not a bank. They're not a credit card. However, there was an issue in 2023, towards the end of the year, where I was locked out. And this was mainly due to the funding source. Now, my funding source was my bank card for my actual bank. And there was some technical issue on the back end. I'm not sure of the precise details, but it meant certain transactions were declined. Now, I didn't want to be charged for failed transactions by various payment processors. So I took the step of switching the funding source to their integration with the bank. And basically they use Plaid, and you log in with your bank credentials and it connects to your bank account that way. It's not my preferred option. I prefer to use the actual card details, but I wanted to avoid issues, especially in the lead up to Christmas. And that worked. So I thought all was well. When I went to switch back a few days later, once their issue was resolved, to the bank card, it then locked me out of my account, asking for additional verification. Now, this isn't a problem if you use privacy.com for just a handful of purchases and random things, but I was using it for everything. My water bill, my electricity, you name it, it was all coming out of privacy.com. And this is where I think I took it a bit too far. Now, for the extreme privacy enthusiasts among you, that may not be a step far enough. But this is about practical privacy. And it was not practical having all my transactions declined. Now, don't get me wrong, I am still a huge fan of privacy.com, but we need to understand what it is and what the limits are. And all credit to them. The issue was resolved very quickly. It was within 24 hours, and I had my account back. They obviously saw that I was a long-standing customer for many years, and everything was back to normal the next day. In fact, it did actually lock out again when I tried to switch the funding source back. Anyway, it was resolved within 24 hours nonetheless. But this has given me some pause for thought to change my strategy. I have set up a privacy.com account for my wife, a separate account. So there's a backup funding source there should I need virtual numbers. Now, privacy.com actually offers me a number of benefits. One of them is the fact I can pause or delete these virtual cards whenever I like. That's great. And there's many other banks and credit card companies that allow you to do this. But the main benefit for me is that the card details that you generate with privacy.com are not tied to a name or address. You can use anything you like. So when I want to use an alias name, like my cat, a pet lizard I had 25 years ago, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. It's essentially the same thing as a Visa gift card that you buy in the supermarket. Now, rethinking this strategy, I use a private mailbox. That could be UPS or a USPS private mailbox service. It could be one of those commercial private mailboxes. It doesn't matter. The fact you have an alternative address, that's what I would use in my real name. Now, that being the case, your credit card company offers you a lot more protections. First of all, they're a credit card. So, they make the purchase, you pay them back. So if you don't receive the goods, they typically resolve the issue for you. They refund your money and they then deal with the hassle with the supplier or the merchant. Now, why I've rethought my strategy is this. I was using privacy.com for purchases in my real name, but being sent to my private mailbox. I've now switched this back to a credit card. One, for the credit card protections that I get, but secondly, I don't want the hassle that I had before, just in case privacy.com goes down. So what do I use it for? Well, as I said, any purchases and alias names. If I purchase, a training course online, I do a lot of online training, I will use privacy.com because I can pause the card. I know I'm not going to get charged again, and it's very convenient for that. I don't have to give them my real name. And most of these services that I purchase online, such as training courses or software, for example, they don't even need my address. So that's why I give an alias name and a dummy or placeholder address. I won't go into too much details there. It's just not needed, say, when I'm purchasing an online training course. I'm buying the training. They don't need to know where I live. It's as simple as that. Anyway, that chapter has closed. Privacy.com is still my preferred payment option, certainly when I'm using alias names, but I am using my credit card a lot more. Now, remember, I'm not using privacy.com for any anonymity with my bank. I'm simply protecting my own identity in the event of a data breach from the merchants. These are the most likely candidates to leak my data, whether they get breached due to a ransomware attack or incompetence at their end. All of the above will happen at some point, and I just don't want my home address being part of that data exposure. Now, 2023 has been interesting for a number of reasons. I ended the year with the flu. It could have been COVID. I didn't get tested. I didn't see the point. I was very sick, so I decided to hide in my basement and isolate from the rest of the family. I thought, either way, whether it's the flu or COVID, I don't want them catching it, and I've just got to struggle through and recover. So I did that. But luckily, I recovered in time for Christmas. Had a great Christmas in the mountains in North Carolina. I always like to go there, whether it's Thanksgiving or over Christmas with the family, and enjoy the solitude. It was very nice. Now, my approach to privacy, aside from the practical side, follows the same methodology for risk management in cybersecurity. And there are 3 letters, CIA. Now, I'm not talking about the Central Intelligence Agency, but what I am talking about is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is the CIA Triad used by cybersecurity professionals around the globe. You can probably guess that confidentiality is really around making data private. An organization doesn't want their intellectual property leaked, and at the same time, I don't want my personal information leaked. Then integrity. We need to make sure that our data is free from tampering. Now, a great example of this is the Signal Messenger app. Now, Signal ensures integrity, particularly through its end-to-end encryption. This means that when I send a message, it's encrypted on my device and it remains encrypted until it reaches the recipient's device, where it's then decrypted. Now, this process ensures that the message can't be altered in transit. Now, Signal also has another feature that's crucial to integrity, and that's this concept of a safety number. And basically, it's used to verify the security of your messages with a contact. The safety number ensures that the conversation is end-to-end encrypted and that the keys used for encryption haven't been switched or changed. Now, I have had my safety number changed when I switched to a new device, for example, and I have to recover signal. I don't get the old messages. There is a way of transferring them, but in my case, I don't bother. I just reinstate signal on the new device. But then my safety number changes, and any recipients I send messages to get alerted of that fact. The point is, that is what integrity is all about. But the one area I think people forget, certainly in privacy circles, is availability. There's no point being so private and secure that you can't function in day-to-day life. In fact, in cybersecurity, there's this law or rule. Imagine a slider bar. On the left, we have functionality, and on the right, we have security. The further to the right we slide this bar, the less functional we have the system. The further to the left, the more convenient and functional it is, the less secure it is. That's just the way things are. Now, a great example of this is the Apple iPhone. I'm not a fan of Apple, I'll be honest. I don't want to use their products and be stuck in their ecosystem. But when it comes to availability, if I was to lose my iPhone, I could go to an Apple store or order one online. And if you're doing things like normal people do and use iCloud to back up, which I did not, but that's another story, you can just recover your settings and all your apps to the new phone and then you're up and running again. But talking about recovering an iPhone to a new device, I had to do this for my wife recently. So I decided to set it up as new, restore her iCloud backup to it. Now, interestingly, because her Apple ID was part of a family account, or still is, I used to be on there many years ago, even though I've deleted my Apple ID, it came up with a prompt with an old email address of mine saying that there's purchases made with that master account that was shared. Do I want to recover those? I'm not sure the exact process it needed, but I think it wanted the password for that account. Here's what bothers me. I deleted my Apple ID. That does not exist. That email address I deleted several years ago, but Apple still know about it and it shared it with the new user of that device. Now, sure, this is an Apple ID which is part of that family account, but there may be reasons you don't want that being shown. You may be in a domestic abuse situation. You want to disconnect from that Apple family account. So in these situations, you have to start again, completely from scratch. And I would recommend using an entirely new email address. Anyway, I digress. Now, as part of my job, I travel a lot. Now, I cannot afford to lose my GrapheneOS device, just the same as when I had an iPhone. Now, the great thing with an Apple iPhone, if you lose a device, is the Find My feature. So if I left my phone in the hotel or perhaps in the back of an Uber, then I can find out exactly where that device is. And it was bothering me for a while is how I'm going to find that and do it in a way that's secure. I don't want anyone else being able to find out my location, for example. And I've actually found two methods, and I use both. Now, the first one is an app called FindMyDevice, or FMD. It's by Nullide. Now, I'll put the link in the show notes. Now, you've got to bear in mind this is not as feature-rich as Apple's Find My feature, but I happen to love it, and there's a number of reasons why. First of all, it does seem to have active development. The latest beta release, which is 0.3.2 at the time of this recording, was 3 months ago, so around November time. So it seems to have active development. Now, what I like about it is there are two ways of finding out the location of the phone. The first way is using SMS. Now, SMS is not secure, so don't freak out too much. But what you can do is set up a list of allowed contacts. So I've set up a secure phone number, which I use in sudo, which is the only phone number allowed to find the location of this device. You then send a text message to the actual SIM number of the device. That's the only time you have to use the real phone number for this device. And you issue a command, in this case, FMD space locate. And then it replies with a link and the longitude and latitude for the GPS coordinates. And you can click the link to openstreetmap.org and there's the location of the device. You can also issue a bunch of other commands over SMS. There's FMD ring, and that's great if it's a situation like I had on the plane where the phone slides under the seat and halfway down the aircraft. As long as you're on the ground, of course, and there's a cell phone signal, you can use that command and it will basically call the phone. You can choose any alert sound you like with GrapheneOS. So I have a nice loud audible sound so I can find where I've left it. There's FMD lock, which as the name suggests, you can actually lock the device. There's FMD stats, which shows you the networks available to the lost device. That could be very interesting. In fact, if it shows Wi-Fi SSIDs, that can also be used to determine the location. There's FMD delete and FMD camera. And that's an interesting one because it actually takes a picture. You can specify front or back, and it will send that encrypted to the server. And in that case, I do believe you need the server feature to be enabled. But then you can see a picture of whoever's holding the phone. You can use their own server, which they host, or you can run this on your own. I think it's a Docker container, so it's very easy to set up. If you wanted this available online, you could set up Linode, for example, and run your own server there, or you could just run a server at home. Now, the great thing with the server is you can log in with your device ID and see your location that way. Now, one of my rules is I don't expose anything to the internet in my home network. And I'm going to get more into this in a moment because I run a whole bunch of services in my home lab, Nextcloud being one of them. But the same applies to this FMD server. I don't know what vulnerabilities it might have, so I would rather not use that feature at all. But it's there as an option. Now, as a backup, I could add my wife. She uses sudo. I could add the number that she uses in there so she can locate me should I get kidnapped or abducted for some reason. But this is a great option. But that's not the only option I use. Now, again, I've got to remind you why I do this. My phone is used for business critical communications. It's used as my day job. But also, what if you need to receive a phone call from your wife and kids? Our phones, unfortunately, are tethered to our lives and very important to us. A few years ago, this is when I was using an iPhone, I dropped my phone on a flight between the seats and it slid behind me. Now, having an Apple Watch, I just managed to ping the device from the watch and it made a sound. Someone picked it up and I got my phone back. If the phone has no Wi-Fi or cell phone service, then you're going to need another way of finding the phone. Now, FindMyDevice isn't going to work in this scenario. And yes, I do lose my phone a lot. And again, being outside of the Apple ecosystem, I'm really happy to have found the solution. And I'm wearing it right now, and it's the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar. The battery life is amazing, considering the features it has. An Apple Watch will last a day at best. This lasts around 20 days between charges. It reminds me of the old Casio G-Shock watches with the black display, the inverted display there. You can actually switch that how you like. You can customize the watch face, and it has all the features I want in a watch. Now, obviously, the first feature you would like is just to tell the time. But I really did get used to some of the things the Apple Watch offered, such as my heart rate. It was really useful when I was in the gym doing a workout to know what my heart rate was. I also like to have a glance at my watch and see what the temperature is outside. Listen, I'm British. When I speak to my family back in the UK, we always talk about the weather, so I need to know what the temperature is. Now, the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar is great. I can actually see the weather. I've customized the watch interface to see the sunrise, the sunset, how many days the battery has got left, the heart rate on there, the date, the temperature. But there's another feature which I really like, and that's Find My Device. And it actually makes an alarm sound on the phone. So if I lose it in the cinema or on a flight or in a restaurant, I get the phone to alert straight away and I know exactly where it is. I do like Garmin as a company for privacy and security. Now, they've had issues in the past and I'm sure they will have data leaks as well. So obviously my Garmin account, as you will expect, is not registered in my real name or with my real address. I have a unique email address associated with that. But the great thing with GrapheneOS is I can say exactly what the Garmin app has access to. I'm just looking now what it has access to. I do give it approximate location because I use that for the weather. You don't have to do that. It has access to nearby devices. Again, it needs that to have that feature I just talked about. It needs network if you're going to sync with your account. But the great thing with GrapheneOS is you can choose what the app is going to have access to or not. And you can heavily restrict that if you want. Now, I've done just enough that I believe I'm secure and private, but I've got those useful features that I use every day. And I'm really happy that I don't need Apple in my life anymore. So my scale from functionality and convenience to the other end of security, I think, is right in the middle. I have a good balance. I have the things I need in my day-to-day life with my phone and my watch. At the extreme end, I shouldn't wear a smartwatch at all. I could just buy one of those Casio calculator watches that I had when I was at high school in the 90s. But this is why I like to focus on practical privacy. It's not about burying your head or hiding in a bunker. Anyway, there's one more point I would like to make around phone security. If I was to lose the device, it's encrypted. So I'm not so concerned about someone getting into the device and accessing my data. It's more about I've lost an expensive device and I want it back. But someone made a comment on Twitter that I really want to address here. And that was, don't use biometric authentication. So we're talking Face ID or fingerprint ID. And I get it. It's not invulnerable. In fact, there's quite a fun scene on the TV show Mr. Robot where Darlene, I think it is, gets the fingerprint from a coffee cup of the security guard. She leaves her cup on drops on the floor. The security guard picks it up. She gets the fingerprint from the cup, scans it, prints it with a 3D printer onto some plastic, and then uses putty or something like that to basically recreate the fingerprint and then accesses the biometric door lock. That's actually technically possible, but I'll be honest with you, that's not my threat model. My threat model is someone sitting next to me on a plane or behind me, and you know how easy it is to see someone's device that's sitting in front of you on a plane, and having them see the PIN number that I've just typed in to unlock my phone. There's even these creepy glasses by Meta and Ray-Ban now. Why on earth anyone thinks this is a good idea, I really do not know. But these are Ray-Ban sunglasses with cameras built in and microphones as well, and you can use them to make phone calls. But the creepy thing is they can record what people are doing. So you only have to be looking in the general direction of someone unlocking their phone and you've just got their PIN number. And this is why I've decided to stick with fingerprint authentication. I am not worried about F Society swiping my fingerprint from my coffee cup and accessing my device that way. If that's the case, I've got other things to worry about in my life. I'm acknowledging that biometric authentication is not the most secure method of securing a device. I get it, but you've got to understand your threat model. And because I travel so much, when I'm entering the PIN number on my phone, I don't want someone eyeing that. Those prying eyes are everywhere. There are mitigations, and it's not one or the other. With GrapheneOS, you can set up a system restart after X amount of hours. I have mine set to 8 hours. So when I'm asleep at night, after 8 hours, my phone will reboot. When the GrapheneOS device has rebooted, you must enter a PIN. And I use a very long PIN. It's actually 12 digits long. Or is it 16? Maybe I'm throwing you off there. But either way, use a very long PIN number. So that means it's not using fingerprint authentication all of the time. I'm only really using that during the day with day-to-day use. And that way, those prying eyes cannot see the PIN number I am entering. And I believe you've got to take that into account. While biometric authentication is not 100% secure, neither are PIN numbers. And it doesn't matter how long that PIN is. If I'm wearing a set of those Ray-Ban sunglasses looking in your general direction, I can just put the video in slow motion and get a 32-digit PIN. So while the advice of using lengthy PIN numbers is very good, and I completely agree, just make sure no one's watching you into that PIN number. Make sure your phone resets. In fact, in an ideal world, you should have your phone do a restart every 2 hours. But then we're encroaching on the impractical, and that's not what this podcast is about. So GrapheneOS, I think you know by now that I'm a huge fan of GrapheneOS. And I forgot to mention, I gave myself another early Christmas present. As well as the watch, I decided to upgrade to the Pixel 8 Pro. It was really an unnecessary upgrade. I had the Pixel 7 Pro before. Now I'm on the Pixel 8 Pro, mainly for the camera. I do like photography. One of my hobbies is cinematography. Not that I use the phone for that, but I do like to take pictures, which leads me on to my next subject, which is how do you back up and synchronize your photos? Now, again, going back to the iPhone, if you take a picture, it's uploaded to iCloud. And if you think back to one of my previous episodes, I highlighted the attack called the fappening, where celebrity iCloud accounts were hacked and their photos were leaked online. I don't want a future vulnerability in iCloud or any possibility of that to happen. I also don't want Apple scanning my photos. Now, this is a sensitive topic in itself. Apple do scan photos for child sexual abuse images. In fact, there is a feature, I believe, on a child's device where you can actually enable that to detect images, because obviously you don't want your child posting that on social media, as sometimes kids do stupid things. But what else are Apple scanning the photos for? Now, what if, for example, I took a picture of my daughter at the beach and she was having fun playing in the sand, and they incorrectly identified that as an image containing sexual abuse? Well, the next thing I know, we have the police at the door and the FBI, whatever happens in those situations. Now, right behind me, I have a Pentax film camera. It used to be my mother's. I haven't used it since the 80s. I think it still works. But I remember those days. I would take pictures with that camera, take the film to the pharmacy and the photo development section at the back of the store, and they would develop the pictures. Now, I knew for a fact they would see the photos. They're physically printing them on site before they give them to me. Those were the good old days, weren't they? No such thing as the fappening or photos being leaked online. But the point I want to make here is, should Apple be policing this? Okay, so back on track. How do I back up and secure the photos? And I take a lot of pictures with my phone. Well, Nextcloud, that's the central heart of my home network. Now, I've been using Nextcloud for well over 10 years. In fact, it used to be OwnCloud. Nextcloud is a fork of that, so it did fork off. This is an open source project, and it enables me to do a number of things. First of all, I run a server at home. There's no exposure to the internet. You can do this. A lot of people do. They want to access their Nextcloud instance wherever they are. I don't. I'm very happy that all my photos sync up when I get home, not while I'm away from the home. Now, I do that for security, and mainly 0 days. If there's a 0-day vulnerability, that's a vulnerability of Nextcloud that we don't know about yet. I don't want that being exposed online. It's as simple as that. So I have this limited to my home network only on Wi-Fi. So as soon as I return home with my device, it synchronizes all those photos. And by the way, you can do this with an iPhone as well. This is what I used to do. I didn't use iCloud. The problem with iOS is it won't allow third-party apps such as Nextcloud to do that photo synchronization in the background. They tried to work around it with notifications. The idea was you can have the app wake up with a notification when the photos need to sync. But honestly, that didn't work. So if you're using Nextcloud with iPhone, you have to go into the Nextcloud app to force the synchronization process. But on GrapheneOS, we don't have that problem. It runs very happily in the background and synchronizes every photo that I take to the Nextcloud server. I have a folder called Photos, and it sorts it by subfolders. So there's a subfolder for each year and then a subfolder for each month. So everything's organized by date, and it works incredibly well. And I also use Nextcloud for my password synchronization. As I've mentioned before, I use Keepass XC, which is a local password database on my PC. Now, in order to synchronize that across my devices, again, I only do this on my local network. I don't have this synchronizing over the internet. Now, on GrapheneOS, I run the Keepass DX app, and that has the ability to open an existing vault, and you can just point it to the Nextcloud folder on the device, and it synchronizes that way. So as soon as I make a change, say on my PC, and I pick up my phone and open Keepass DX, then that change is already synchronized and it's good to go. And this works incredibly well. If you are still using an iPhone, I would recommend an app called Strongbox to do this. It's free, I believe, in the App Store. I think there's a paid version as well if you want to support the developer. Don't quote me on that. I'll let you check that out. But Strongbox is my recommendation, and that can open a Nextcloud directory containing your Keepass database. So I also use Nextcloud for my general file storage. In fact, I have almost 2 terabytes of data in there. I use it and depend on it a lot. One of the reasons it's so large is I do music production, and my music production folder on its own, I think, is almost 1 terabyte in size. So it really has been the heart of my network for the last decade or so. Now, the other reason Nextcloud works so well for me is for my note-taking. Now, for many years, I've been taking notes in markdown format. And by the way, if you don't do this, I really urge you to look at it and learn it. It's not that complicated. It's basically a standardized format for taking notes. So the pound symbol or the hash symbol, depending on where you're from, is for a heading. Hash or 2 pound symbols is subheading, and so on. You have 2 asterisks either side of the text, that's bold. 1 asterisk, that's italic. You can add links, so it's open square bracket and close square bracket for the actual text, and then open bracket, close bracket for the link itself. When you get used to writing in Markdown, I think it's incredibly efficient. I use this in my day job. For my writing in the evening, I make a lot of notes. I actually prefer it than these typical editors like Word and OneNote and Evernote. Now, when I first started writing in Markdown, I used an app called Joplin. It's very good. It does support encryption somewhat, but I had issues with it. I actually lost a large proportion of my notes. There was some issue in the way it stored encryption keys. I'm not going to get into an argument there. I got very frustrated. I'm not going back to using Joplin again. Now, I know there are other apps out there, such as Standard Notes. I haven't really looked into that a great deal, but my requirements are fairly simple. I want my notes as files on my local device. I don't want to have a proprietary file naming convention. If I have a file called raisenotes.md, that's the Markdown file extension, I want to use that. I don't want some random file name. If I want to create a subfolder called, I don't know, music notes and put my notes for music in there, I want to do that. And apps like Joplin and some of the other apps were just restricting me from doing that. They dictated their own proprietary directory structure and file naming system. So my solution to this is to use Obsidian. It really has been amazing. It completely honors my local file system. So you have this concept of a vault. So if I go onto my Obsidian system now, I can create a vault, which is just a directory on my computer. It runs on Mac, it runs on Windows, it runs on Linux, it runs on pretty much anything. The interface is very nice. It supports plugins. I have a spell check plugin. I don't do too crazy with that. And it just works. So you may be wondering, okay, what do I do on my GrapheneOS device? There is an Obsidian app, as I mentioned, for Android and also for iOS. I personally don't like the mobile version. It doesn't support Nextcloud integration very well. So what I use is the Nextcloud Notes app. It's very basic, but then again, I don't really take a lot of notes on my phone. And when I do, it's good enough. Where I take the majority of my notes is on my PC or my laptop. Now, because this is on Nextcloud, if I make a note on my PC and open up the Nextcloud Notes app on my phone, it syncs within seconds. It really is great. Now, as for note-taking, this is an art, I think, in itself. I have my own structure. I have something called a scratchpad, which is a directory. Within that scratchpad directory, I have to-do. And this is something I erase every day. It's my daily to-do list. So, I might have to go to the post office or go and take my daughter for lunch, whatever it may be. So that's my day-to-day notes, if I just want to make generic notes. I have a directory called the lockdown, and guess what that's for? It's for this podcast. So every episode, I make notes of what I'm going to talk about. I have my CISO notes. I have hacking, cybersecurity, health and fitness. I have cooking recipes. You name it, I have everything in there, and every one of those is a subfolder. Now, what I like about this, as I said, is learning to use Markdown is incredibly efficient. Someone actually made a comment to me once and said, I haven't got time to learn that. It's like learning another coding language. I really could not disagree more. It is not a coding language. In fact, Obsidian, if you insist, you can use shortcuts like Control-B for bold, and it will just put the asterisks either side for you. So it really isn't that complicated. Now, the reason I use this as well is portability. I can open up any one of my note files in Visual Studio Code. And if it detects it as Markdown, which it will, it formats it correctly. I can import it anywhere. There are tools out there to convert Markdown to Word document or to PDF. In fact, I have an extension here to generate a PDF. So if I need to print something for my wife, I normally just send her the PDF and she can go and print it. So Obsidian is excellent. And with Nextcloud doing the synchronization behind the scenes, locally on my network, it ensures I have all my notes on every single one of my devices. Okay, the next topic, and I've managed to avoid this for so long, but I really think I need to address it. That's my home lab. Now, in order to run Nextcloud, you obviously need somewhere to install it. Now, if you have an old laptop lying around, you could do that. I would personally install Ubuntu Linux on there, and then you can install Nextcloud and do it that way. You could attach an SSD drive to it, a USB drive, it doesn't matter. That's the cheapest and most basic option for you. Because I've been running mine for so long, I have quite an interesting setup. So I actually run two Supermicro servers. They're the E300 9D servers. Had them quite a while now. There's 128 gigabytes of memory in each one. Each one has an internal SSD drive, Intel processors, and that runs VMware vSphere 8. Now, the reason I'm running VMware is I used to work at VMware. I started working with VMware technology back in 2006, in the early days. I joined VMware in 2011. The reason I'm living in the US now is because of VMware, but as of next week, I'm going to be starting a new role at a new company, so I will reveal more about that in a future episode. But anyway, back to the home lab. The reason I run VMware is I can use that for virtual machines. I can also run containers on there. Nextcloud is running as a virtual machine on those servers. It's running an Ubuntu 22.04 LTS, that's long-term support. And for storage, that's connected to a QNAP TS659 Pro, which is very old. I've had it for, I think, well over 10 years, possibly even 15 years now. So I'm going to be upgrading that to a new storage array very soon. Now, I could very easily go down the rabbit hole of servers and storage, NFS, 10 gig networking and all of that good stuff. But I think I should save that for a blog post because it could get quite complicated. Essentially, though, to run Nextcloud, you just need somewhere to put it, whether that's a spare laptop or you have a server set up like I do. I think it's well worth the investment. I run local encryption on the disk. I have encryption in transit. Let's Encrypt certificates are free. You can do all that. But what it gives you is complete control of your data. I host it, I control it, no one else has access to it, it's not available online, you can only access it from my home network. But honestly, for convenience, Nextcloud, for my notes and my password synchronization, my photo uploads, has really been excellent. Okay, I'm going to avoid that rabbit hole, but please do get in touch if you have any questions over my setup, my home lab, you want some advice, assistance, or you just want to chat about geeky stuff, that's fine. Please do let me know. So before we wrap up for today, let's just talk about one more thing that I believe is critical for storing your data, certainly if you're using something like Nextcloud, and that's backups. Certainly for privacy enthusiasts like you and I, backing up our data can be a real challenge because we can put all this effort in place to secure our data, encrypt it locally, but then if you have to back it up to the cloud, then why not just use Proton Drive, Google Drive, Dropbox, or any of those cloud services? Well, I'll tell you, there's plenty of reasons not to use Dropbox and Google Drive. Proton Drive, I think, would be an excellent alternative if you don't want to run your own Nextcloud instance. But to answer the question, what do I do for backups? Well, there's two things. I want to be able to encrypt the backup locally before I send it anywhere. But then I want a low-cost storage option for that encrypted backup. Now, the solution that I came up with is to use a tool called Restic, that's RESTIC, running on Ubuntu Linux, which encrypts the data and then backs up to something called Backblaze B2. Restic is not limited to that. You can back up to AWS or any other cloud provider. But the beauty of this is the data is encrypted before it's sent to the cloud. Now, Backblaze B2 is cloud storage, very similar to Amazon's S3. Now, both offer something called object storage, and essentially this means that they store data as distinct units, or in this case we call them objects, rather than files in a typical file hierarchy that would be on your PC. Now, this makes them great for handling very large amounts of unstructured data like videos, images, backups, and in my case, my entire Nextcloud directory. Now, the great thing with using Restic is it's only going to send those changes to the cloud provider. You're not duplicating everything or backing up everything over and over again each night. It's very, very efficient. And to give you an idea, I'm just looking at my Backblaze billing page now. I have just over 2 terabytes of data backed up, and it's costing me $8.62 a month. So it's very cheap. And what you want to strive for is something called the 3-2-1 backup rule. So let's have at least 3 copies of data, but have 2 of those on different media and 1 of them off-site. Now, unfortunately, in today's world of ransomware attacks and cyber criminals encrypting our data, we've had to extend on the 3-2-1 rule. So now it's 3-2-1-1-0. And what that 1-0 at the end means is you store at least 1 of those copies offline, and preferably immutable. Basically, that means no one can touch it, it can't be tampered with. Back to that CIA Triad, integrity. You want to make sure that that's untouchable. And then the 0 is verification. You want to make sure that your backups are verified without any errors. There's no point having a backup if you cannot restore it. With the risk of going down a rabbit hole, setting up Restic and Backblaze B2 is not for the faint-hearted. I will have to publish a blog post on this in the near future, so again, please do get in touch if you want to know exactly how I did it. There's a lot of notes I have to share, but I've got to be careful we don't go too far down the extreme end of privacy. So with that, I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter @privacypod, or you can email me lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, and until next time, have a great week.
I'm afraid I have to terminate this call.